webOS Nation, and welcome to PalmCast Live. This is episode 152 for Tuesday, December 13th, 2011. I'm Derek Kessler. I'm going to be your host for today's podcast, and I'm joined by Rene Ritchie of TipB plus Mobile Nation's video podcast maestro. How you doing, Rene?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Derek. How are you?
Fantastic and slightly confused.
I'm substituting for Tim tonight because I believe that he's busy having his code audited by a free software foundation, maybe Stallman himself.
Ooh, oh, I forgot to turn off my ringer.
Oh, nice.
I am a failure. Maybe was that Tim? Nope, that wasn't Tim.
If it's HP, you can take it.
Forget that. So, it's been a week, maybe 2 weeks since our last podcast. I can't remember anymore because it's been a lot of news in the past just couple of days. But we're going to get right down to it. We've been introducing the podcast for the past couple of months now as Greetings webOS Nation, and it's been on purpose. Been getting you used to, ingrained in the new name, the new branding of Pre-Central. We are now webosnation.com. Still all the same articles, the same community, the same forums, the same homebrew apps, the same everything. Everything that you know and love about Pre-Central is newer and better and more newer logo-eer. We are now webOS Nation. We chose to sort of throw the switch earlier than we had planned. We'd been hoping, or at least projecting, doing a big site overhaul, which we're still going to do heading into 2012. Get ourselves on a new system and have a new site design finally. But with the news we'll be touching on soon about how webOS is being open sourced, we decided, what the heck? Let's go ahead and throw the switch. We're going to turn on webOS Nation now because really, it's not about the devices anymore. It's not about the Palm Pre, or it's not about the touchpad. It's about webOS. It's been about webOS for a while now. We've been working on figuring out what exactly to call ourselves now, and it struck us that this site has always been about you, the listener, the reader, the forum member, the homebrew developer. It's about the community. It is about the webOS Nation. And we thought, what better than to embrace that, to exemplify and amplify what it is, this community. So we are now webOS Nation. If you're already following us on Twitter or on Google+, we've, thanks to their wonderful user policies, are able to change our names. So we are now at webOS Nation and webOS Nation Plus, or whatever it is on Google+. I'm not really sure. Nobody really knows.
Some random number.
We have some like 12-digit number that says what we are. I can never remember that, though somehow I can remember Rene's credit card number. I don't know why. If you have liked us on Facebook or have been following us on YouTube, unfortunately their account policies do not allow us to change our names on that, so you'll have to like our new pages, which are very aptly named webOS Nation on Facebook and youtube.com/webOS Nation on YouTube, so you can follow and subscribe to us there and catch all of the latest. We're going to keep chugging right along. We're heading into the big, great unknown.
Is there any truth to the rumor that you grabbed the web guys and you said, webOS Nation, do it now, change it?
Somewhat. The truth is, we'd actually been planning to make the switch earlier this week, like Monday, but somebody, Marcus, may have accidentally put the header logo up earlier than planned on the day of the announcement, so we decided, boom, we'll throw the switch now. So what the heck?
The man invented Visor Central. I'm going
to give him some slack because he's the man who created the site that is the predecessor, the ancestor of ours, back 12 years ago. So webOS Nation is just the newest installment of Visor Central, Trio Central, Pre-Central. Yeah,
Amazing.
we have dispatched with the central branding because, webOS Central doesn't really roll off the tongue really well. And, it's not, we're open source now.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily have devices anymore. So Central doesn't really seem to work all that well. But yeah, this marks the only, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Because, it really sort of starts to sink in. We think this site's been here for 12 years. We have 500,000 members registered.
You didn't want to announce that you were going to change the name and then say that in 2 weeks you'd study things and then maybe announce what the new name would be and then decide to open source the name.
We are studying our options
In the coming weeks.
We're going to take a holistic approach and make a decision in the coming months.
Nice. Well played.
Yes. So that's enough about us, the webOS nation. Now let's actually get to our topic du jour, which ironically enough is webOS. We found out, it's got a little bit of a tip that on Friday, the webOS Global Business Unit was going to have an all-hands meeting with CEO Meg Whitman on hand. Now, the webOS Global Business Unit consists of 500 employees. This is within an organization of HP, which has a total of 300,000 employees or some insane number like that. They have hundreds of thousands of people. So for Meg Whitman, CEO of all these hundreds of thousands of people, to be coming down to meet with just these 500 people tells us hopefully this time there's actually news. We assumed the last time that she was coming down to meet with these 500 people that there was going to be news, and she told them we don't have any news. That they were going to eventually, they were going to take 3 to 4 weeks to come up with a decision, but that don't leave. Don't leave us, please. We need you around for whatever our decision ends up being. Hopefully it's not firing all of you.
Was this more like Moses coming down from the mountain to consult with his people, or more like the emperor arriving to find out why the Death Star wasn't completed?
This first meeting? I think the first meeting... I'm trying to think of a movie analogy, and I can't think of one.
Like, were there stormtroopers around the room when she arrived, or was it more like, here's a picnic basket, let's share?
It's more of a picnic basket saying, let's work this out. Though not us. It's going to be me and my CFO and maybe some other people on the board. We're going to work it out.
Netscape, he'll figure it out for you.
And then we'll let you know. Yeah, we're going to work together on this. And she said at the time it was going to be 3 to 4 weeks. And in the intervening, what ended up being 4 to 5 weeks, she made plenty of surprisingly positive comments about webOS, and going so far as to say it was good and we didn't even give it a chance. Which sort of had us thinking, at least my conclusion to draw from that was that HP was actually going to keep webOS, that they were going to plow forward, they're going to start making new devices, and they're going to do it right, and they're going to end up spending billions of dollars more over the $3.3 billion that they already lost on webOS to do this right, to actually give webOS the chance that it didn't get. And as it would turn out, I was kind of half right and half wrong. Somewhat very wrong. HP announced on Friday, right at the start of this all-hands meeting, that they were planning to open source webOS, which was kind of surprising me. Some had predicted this in the community, or not necessarily predicted it, but suggested it as an option, something that they would like to see happen. And I will be honest and admit that I was wrong in denying that this was a possibility and dismissing it out of hand every time it came up, because I didn't think it was either possible or a reasonable course of action for HP. I'm still trying to really come to terms with it. because it's an interesting path. It's sort of the cheapest option short of actually killing webOS for HP.
It's
And
the fastest thing they can do without having to pay severance.
right, and it's going to cost them more than actually paying severance, because they're committing to a long-term, multi-year investment in the open source webOS. They're going to be, there's still the question of what exactly open source webOS is going to look like. Is it going to follow more of the Firefox and Linux model, or is it going to be more like Google's model, where they develop it all in-house and then open source it by version? We don't really know how it's going to work. We're still waiting to find out about that. But considering the press release that they put out and the comments that they had, where their goal is to accelerate the open development of the webOS platform, it tells me that they're going to be sort of leveraging the power of the community. webOS has a very strong homebrew development group. So they might actually be looking to take advantage of the guys from like webOS internals and all of the independent homebrew developers who've done all of the patching and kernel work and all of these homebrew apps to actually better webOS. But it's really sort of hazy right now what exactly they're going to do with it.
Did they mention a license yet, Derek? Whether it's going to be Apache licensed or something else? No.
We don't have a license yet. We don't know what sort of governance structure they're going to go with. They did say they're going to go with a good, transparent, and inclusive governance structure to avoid fragmentation. How exactly they're going to do that when it's open source, I don't know. But that software will be provided as a pure open source project. Now, at the time, HP didn't announce any hardware plans in the form of hardware from HP or from partners. They just said, we're open sourcing webOS, which, that tells us that, they lost $3.3 billion in a year and a third of webOS. That's not including the $1.2 billion they spent to buy Palm,
which is a fairly big chunk of change.
Yes, so they lost $4.5 billion pretty much on webOS when Leo decided to pull the plug. And that's a massive chunk of change. So there's still, they want to recoup that, or at least not make sure it's a complete loss, but at the same time, HP doesn't necessarily have a whole bunch of cash on hand. So actually going forward and making new smartphones and new tablets and whatnot would be prohibitively expensive. They'd have to spend billions of more dollars to do this. And honestly, right now, they would have to start from square one again as far as hardware is concerned. Because the touchpad, I like my touchpad. It's a great little tablet. But it's great in comparison to the iPad 1.
Yeah, it's a 2010 device.
Right. It's okay in comparison to the iPad 2. It is, compared to the Transformer Prime and the Tab 10.1 and the the Zoom 2 and the eventual iPad 3, it's nothing. And I doubt that anything HP had in development would be anywhere near ready to compete. They'd have to.
Spoken before about how long the development cycle is. Like, people sometimes think that they announce a device and they can make it in a month.
No, when you announce something, you have to be able. They have to do things announcing the way that, Apple does announcement, in that it's ready to ship when they announce it. It's on the barge on its way to the United States when they announce. Which means, right now, if they start from square one again and decide to develop new webOS hardware, it's going to be at least a year pretty much before we see anything. At least. Yeah. Whitman, they didn't have any hardware plans in the press release, but Whitman did come forward and say that HP may eventually produce new webOS hardware. Not likely in 2012, but they would like to make new webOS tablets. So we're looking at least 13 months.
Do you think if they
Hmm?
If they start producing Windows 8 tablets, they'd be able to leverage the same hardware for webOS, or do you think they're going to want to keep it separate?
They might be able to leverage the same guts because Windows 8 can run on ARM processors right now,
Yeah.
and the touchpad is running an ARM 8 chip. In fact, there was a rumor that HP was using some touchpads that they had left over in stock to test Windows 8, just to get a feel for it. So conceivably they could. I don't know that they would though. But then again, HP is all about maximizing shareholder value. Although I don't see how really open sourcing WebOS is maximizing shareholder value. This almost feels like it's Whitman's private little project,
Has
which is a
anything
good
that they've
thing.
done in the last 2 years maximized shareholder value?
Firing Leo Apotheker.
They hired him though for.
Yeah, but firing them was a shareholder value maximizing move.
Do you think if they hadn't hired him and gone straight to Whitman, the story for webOS would have been different?
Yes. If Mark Hurd had been able to keep it in his pants, the story for WebOS would have been different. But he was not able to.
No.
So Whitman is looking to eventually make tablets again, maybe in a year or so, or thereabouts more. But this is going to sort of cut to the heart of the WebOS nation. She doesn't see HP making smartphones.
He's so angry.
This Pre 3 is the last WebOS smartphone. And if I had to take a guess, it might be the last WebOS smartphone we ever see. Because HP's plan to open source WebOS, they haven't been, they've been forthcoming on what they're able to be forthcoming about. But there's some things that they'll answer. I asked about what their governance structure was going to look like, and they said, right now, we don't know. We're still working on that. We're going to figure it out. We're going to talk with the open source community and discuss with them and see what's going to work best. So they're being very open and deliberate about that to figure out what the best way is going to be. But if I had to take a guess, the WebOS that's going to be open sourced is going to be WebOS 3.0. It's not going to be the WebOS 2.2.4 or whatever the heck it is my phone is running. I think it's 2.2.1. That's not going to see the open source light of day because there aren't going to be any takers for it.
What's really sad is we're coming up on CES 2012, and the Pre was introduced at CES, I think 3 years ago now, and it was one of the best product introductions I've ever seen. It took diehard, bitter, tired journalists and made them leap out of their seats, and it was a fantastic product introduction.
It was I might say it's been the best product introduction since the iPhone introduction.
And only because the iPhone got to go first. I mean, it embarrassed Google. They took a tiny little company with almost no resources and made a better, more elegant, more web-centric operating system than Google managed to produce in a much longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, this, since it's going to be open source, it's entirely possible that somebody could take the eventual open source released WebOS and create a phone client for it and release it on a phone. But the hurdles to doing that, are going to be massive. It's not like taking Android 2.3 and shoehorning it into a tablet where you can pull things out. It's already ready to go. It's not perfect for a tablet, but you can make it work.
Yeah.
It would be like it's more like taking Honeycomb, Android 3.0, which was released just for tablets, and trying to shoehorn it on a phone. You'll notice that nobody did that. Not even the open source community couldn't do that because Google never released the code.
Yes.
But nobody even tried.
Maybe one of those like 4.6 or 5.5 inch Sammys, you get the factory in China that makes those, and you just get like Huawei or one of those Chinese knockoff companies to put them together.
Yeah, maybe, and that could happen. It's going to be open source and open to whoever wants it. We don't know exactly what licensing restrictions are going to be put on it yet, but they say it's going to be a pure open source project. So we'll see what exactly people will be able to do with that. Though I don't see phones in the future, which of course, that leads us to the question of what's a WebOS user to do? Do you hold on to your dear webOS phone to the bitter end and stockpile a whole bunch of pre-3s and veers in the corner.
10 of them in the freezer, Derek. 10 of them in the freezer.
I do have one sitting on to the side right now. I'm more saving up to buy more touchpads on eBay to complete my fort. But the question is, what there are multiple questions. The first is, what is the open source future of webOS going to look like? What does webOS, when open sourced, put out to the public? What does that look like? And I started to think about it. They said that I spoke to HP briefly before the announcement about this, and they said that they're going to open source webOS in chunks, in segments. They'll put out Enyo, the application framework for the touchpad. It's based on HTML5 and JavaScript and web and CSS and other web technologies, just like the Mojo framework of the pre, but it's a little more obfuscated. It's more object-oriented, I guess you could call it. I'm not a programmer. I don't really know. They're going to open source that in the very near future, probably, I'd say, in January, February. Then they're going to move on to open sourcing the webOS operating system itself, all the way down to the Linux core. Everything from the base up to the title bar and the quick wave launcher will be open source. They're going to do it in these segments. They're going to do it in segments because they actually have to go through it pretty much line by line and scrub out any proprietary information, because up until now it's been a closed source operating system. They've been able to license parts from other companies that would enable them to release it more easily, not have to code all of this stuff themselves and integrate other services into webOS. So they're going to have to go through and scrub that stuff out and either substitute in other open source code or create their own and open source that code. And I started to think about that, what exactly that means and how much proprietary stuff webOS might have in it. They may have licensed the scroll bounce from the bottom of a screen from Apple or something like that. That might not be a big deal. They take that out, and the open source version doesn't have that, and you scroll to the bottom and it just stops. Or it scrolls to the bottom and you get a bunch of white space or something like that.
Or you just stick Joe Hewitt's version in and take Apple's out.
Exactly. There are all sorts of things that could happen with that. The bigger question that's a small item. It's a detail. One of the bigger things that has me a little worried, and then I was worried at first and then started thinking about it, are the user-facing options, the things that make webOS. There are a handful of things that make webOS really unique. It's cards, multitasking cards, and the ability to sort them and stack them and organize and have everything you're doing in front of you all at once. That's a big thing, and I use that a lot. Right now my phone's empty because I'm trying to focus on the podcast instead of my phone. So there are cards. The multitasking. There's just type / universal search, which is cross device. They got it done right, correctly before Apple had even thought about it. They managed Google search better than Google could, plus inter-device search. And the third is synergy, being able to pull in all of your contacts and your calendar and your photos and your phone calls and tasks and everything from the cloud onto your device. And if there's one part that's really dependent upon third parties, it's synergy. It's all of these services from Google to Yahoo to PhotoBucket to YouTube that are all dependent upon it. They all rely on these third-party APIs and third-party service calls to bring in all of this information. And yes, all of these APIs are available to the public. Anybody can sign up with Google to get the Google API or sign up with Facebook to get the Facebook API. But because it's just available to the public does not mean it's open source. You have to sign an agreement to get the Facebook API to make a Facebook app, to tie Facebook into your operating system. And I'm pretty sure that agreement says you can't distribute this as open source code.
Yeah.
So when webOS comes out as open source, all of these synergy items might not even be there, which had me a little worried at first. And then I started thinking about it and I realized that's not necessarily a problem. So HP said that they were going to open source the webOS operating system. Synergy is part of webOS. Synergy, the system. Synergy being able to pull in contacts and calendars and photos and all of this stuff from third-party sources. These third-party sources are not part of Synergy. They are plugins to Synergy. And HP actually already has a system in place. They call it Synergy connectors. Anybody who wants to can create a Synergy connector for a third-party service to pull that service's contacts and calendars and photos and tasks and all of that stuff into your phone, just like it does on webOS. In fact, there's actually a Skype Synergy plugin available for webOS devices running 2.0 that aren't the Pre-3 or Verizon Pre-2. So it already exists. Conceivably, HP could actually release webOS without any Synergy connectors built in, fully open source, and have the option to actually download these and have these plugins be closed source plugins and offer the ability to actually add Facebook syncing and add Google syncing into the OS without that part having to be open source. So they may have to actually cleave parts of the OS off as closed source, but be able to have them added back in after the fact. They get to be something as simple as when you're setting up a webOS device that's running the pure open source version, it gives you the option to download these plugins to enable Facebook and Google and Yahoo and PhotoBucket.
Sort of like how pure open source Android has no Google apps.
Exactly. And that then brings up the next question. There aren't really many HP apps, aside from, I should say, pure Android doesn't have Gmail or the Android market, but it still has a calendar app and it still has an email app. Yeah. There are no real HP apps with the exception of the app catalog.
Blazor.
Well, ironically, actually, I don't know if this still works in webOS 2.0. If I search for Blazor, if I do a just type search for Blazor, it brings up the web browser.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. I love that. But, they've got a browser and calendar and
they've got
messaging.
More than the playbook, Derek. To be fair, they've got more native apps in the playbook.
True. They've got all this stuff, but the app catalog and plus, I guess, backup and system updates, they're really reliant upon HP. They call back to cloud services that HP offers. And so want us to wonder if you can release a pure open source project that is fully dependent upon its existence or its viability from a third party. Now, Android, as the open source project, even without the Android market and Gmail and whatever else pure Google is added into it, is still a viable operating system. And you can build things off of that. The Kindle Fire is built off of Android, and it's not necessarily a bad experience. It's what it is.
The Nook Color.
Nook I wasn't going to say tablet. Anything.
Okay.
Yeah. The Nook tablet, sure. So you have to wonder what sort of steps would have to be taken. Would they be able to offer the app catalog as a third-party download to the open source webOS? Would backup services become a third-party service? And HP would have to enable the option for other backup services. Could I finally back up my webOS phone to my desktop? That'd be amazing.
To Dropbox.
It would blow my mind. So those are some of the hurdles to open sourcing webOS. Though that's just the hurdles to actually getting webOS in the open source. That might actually be the easy part. The hard part is hardware.
Yeah.
Because there have been many mobile open source OSs in the past.
Open
WebOS
Moco and
is, yeah, there's been
the Migo, whatever they're called.
Migo, Moblin, Mamo.
Is there a rule they have to start with M, Moco? Someone must have made a rule at some point.
I don't know. They open sourced Symbian.
That's true.
Because it was the end of Symbian.
Yeah.
What has come out of the Symbian Foundation since it went open source? Nothing much. I don't think that HP is going to open source and abandon webOS. Whitman, at least from the press releases and the interviews and her comments, seems to be committed to doing something right with webOS. She wants something actually interesting and viable and maybe someday profitable for HP to come out of webOS.
Can I mention for the record, Derek, that it might be fictional, but your sit-down conversation with Meg Whitman was one of the funniest, most bittersweet things I have read in a long time.
I don't know if it was a conversation with Whitman or with HP or just with the HP logo. It was very abstract.
Every time you said printers, I fell off the chair.
Leo. So hardware is the real big question for webOS. HP, at least Whitman, has said that she wants to make new tablets and hardware for webOS a year from now. Plans can change. If this open source webOS project doesn't go very far, and it doesn't gain the traction that HP hopes it's going to gain, I can see HP pulling the plug on this and saying it's not worth it. If Windows 8 comes out and it turns out to actually be a blockbuster success and HP is selling millions upon millions of Windows 8 tablets, I can see them saying, why bother making a webOS tablet? It'd be a massive investment of our limited resources with limited potential upside.
And they have a lot of ass cover. Like, look, we tried the open source thing. We did everything we could for you guys, really. Now we have this beautiful Windows 8 tablet that we never quite got webOS running on, but you guys can buy this instead. It's still HP. You're HP fans, right?
Exactly. And so it's going to be open source, and the guys with webOS internals and the Cyanogen mod guys and everybody else who feels like it can take it and hack it onto whatever they want. But hacking an OS onto some other platform or on somebody else's hardware, or loading an updated version of webOS onto my Pre or my touchpad is not a way for an OS to survive.
Yeah.
If that is to be the future of webOS, that's a death sentence. And I don't want a death sentence. I'm very hopeful that HP and other companies latch on to this open source webOS and actually do something with it. And they do something amazing and make hardware and software that is actually worth putting out and worth buying and good for the users and good for the companies that make it.
It's because if you remember when Android first came out and they open sourced it, it was almost a running joke. We would go to Mobile World Congress or one of the other shows, and this is the big Android show, and it'd be a wasteland. It took, I think, until the Droid came out for Android to even start getting any traction.
Yeah, it took until the Droid, the Motorola Droid, and Android 2.0 for Android to finally take off. The HTC Hero came out running 1.5 or something like that.
The G1 and the G2.
Yeah, and they were laughable. Yeah. And right now, I think that webOS is further along than at least Android 1.5 and in many areas Android 2.0 and even 4.0, but it's very far behind in other areas. And I don't know if the open source webOS project will be able to make up for those differences. They're going to be able to leverage a lot of the outside of the box thinking that has come from the webOS open source community, but it still depends on what sort of governance structure is going to be built into this to make sure that it actually happens. And this has been a lot of doom and gloom for what is actually potentially very good news. Open sourcing webOS has two kind of futures for it. It's either the death of webOS or it's the rebirth and resurgence and the new life of webOS. And,
Did you just say it's either the end or the beginning? Did you manage to work that into a really cool
yes,
sentence?
Okay. WebOS is dead. Long live WebOS.
Do you have any sense about whether there is a benevolent dictator to kind of be the decider? Because, Ubuntu succeeded in part because they were very good at providing a singular vision. And Andy Rubin, despite Android being OpenE, is, Andy Rubin and Google still drive it very carefully. Mm-hmm. Is there any sense that there'll be someone like a champion who will be that person for WebOS?
We're really not sure yet. HP does have, I'm blanking on his name right now, the Netscape guy.
Mark Anderson?
I think so.
Yeah.
Andreessen or something like that. Yeah, he was behind Netscape, and which eventually came into Firefox. And then he joined the HP board. He has a lot of experience with WebOS, or with open source, and actually even guiding a project from closed source to open source, like I did with Netscape to Mozilla, then Firefox. So he has experience with that and has been advising Whitman in how to properly do this and make sure it's done correctly. But who exactly is going to be driving it, what sort of structure is going to be behind it, we don't know yet. It almost feels like this was an 11th hour decision. They were waiting until the last minute, crunching the numbers, trying to figure out the best way to do it, and this was what they came up with. They don't want to get rid of WebOS, but they don't want to invest billions and billions of dollars in it again.
Because mobile, there's really no future in it, right?
Oh, no, there's no future in mobile at all. No, it's all printers.
Yeah, printers and ink.
Mm-hmm. So, this could be very positive for WebOS. If they can successfully leverage the community and the developer base and make WebOS into something exciting and fascinating, and manage to get hardware partners on board so that they can make new and exciting tablets and maybe phones and refrigerators and cars and toasters, WebOS could see a new future.
Do you think it's possible that at some point either Eric Schmidt will say something incredibly stupid or Google will finally find their open source balls and stop letting Verizon mutilate their operating system, and a carrier or a current Android partner or maybe someone threatened by Google owning Motorola will want a strong open source alternative?
It's possible. I don't see... I don't think I can really comment too much on the relationship between Verizon and Google. It's slightly incestuous.
It's illegal in many states, I believe.
Yes, it is. It's weird. Although I think Android has become too beholden to the carriers.
Yeah.
And HP right now is not, especially since they're probably not going to be releasing the phone version anyway. So forget about the carriers. Screw them. They're not involved at all. I don't think that WebOS is going to have the same problems. What might be problem is HP's role in it all. It's going to be an open source project, but it's going to be guided by HP. And this is with the goal, I guess, of making a WebOS that HP can use again on tablets and whatnot. So even though it's open source, it's still HP's open source project. So why would... It's not like a Nexus phone, where the Nexus phones have never really taken off before for Google.
Yeah.
They were always very niche products. HP intends to make WebOS tablets. And if Sony or LG or somebody wants to make WebOS tablets too, they're going to be in competition with the people who are driving the development of their operating system. It would be like Microsoft making a Windows 8 computer.
So even if someone crazy like that Jeff Bezos SOB decides that he's had it with Android, he wants a real open source alternative, he might hesitate because HP still has a very strong control over the system.
Right. So there's a lot of question marks floating over my head right now and over a lot of the WebOS community, but we are at least pointing in a direction now. We've
I want a
taken the
Kindle with cards, Derek. Sorry, I just want a Kindle with cards.
oh, that'd be fascinating. Yeah, as I wrote in long webOS is dead. Long live webOS. They've taken the route between sending webOS into the stratosphere with new hardware and new software and a multi-billion-dollar, multi-year commitment, and digging a 6-foot deep hole and shoveling it in.
And salting the earth.
They've gone for the road. It's between the ground and between the sky. It goes in a straight line, but it's heading out to this desert. We don't know exactly where the road goes, how long it's going to take to get to where we're going, or even if we have enough gas to get there. But we at least have a direction. We're going that way. Open source. It's over there.
They're a hardy people, Meg. They survived the desert 2 or 3 times now. We can send them in again.
Exactly. We're on the 4th or 5th life of Palm now.
Yeah.
It's the company that refuses to die. And same with webOS. And now that webOS has gone open source, it will never really die. The question right now is, will it ever live?
Yeah. Do you
But we
see
gotta
maybe another company picking up parts that, like, could Mateus Duarte decide that he's fed up with aping webOS on Android and just take what he wants from the open source? Or, Apple decides as a part they really like, this is much better than our multitask app switcher.
Well, it's going to be open source now, so they very well could. But what's going to be open source are not the patents.
Oh.
HP still is going to hold the patents.
So the playbook can't really become legit this way.
Right. HP is open sourcing the code. They said that they're going to hold on to the patents and they will use them to vigorously and selfishly protect their operating system and their developers. So if anybody decides to pull a Motorola and sue somebody using webOS on their hardware because they think it violates one of their patents, they're going to have HP to contend with.
Who has the patent for the smartphone?
Yes. Not that it particularly matters right now. So they're going to be holding on to those patents, but it's just the code that's open source. So if HP doesn't hold a patent on Synergy, on the concept of Synergy, you could take the code for Synergy and integrate it into your operating system. The problem is webOS is still coded in JavaScript and HTML and CSS and other web technologies, even down to that level of Synergy, to where our homebrew community has been able to patch this stuff with basic HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS patches. They could just graft it on.
Well, RIM is all in on WebWorks, and Windows 8 is going to have a huge HTML5 layer.
Right, but that's just those are layers.
Yeah.
WebOS is built on web technology. Down to its core, it's web. So all this code is going to be out there, but actually, lifting cards out of WebOS and adding it into Java-based Android would be nigh impossible without creating a new UI layer to be able to actually natively render web elements on the OS. It'd be a massive amount of work when they can just copy the just copy the concept and make it their own, which they've done.
Been there. I got the T-shirt.
Apple's the only one that hasn't done that.
I'm still upset about that.
Yeah, well, Apple's got to forge their own path and come up with unique innovations like the notifications drawer.
Yes. Ouch.
We've gotten a little glimpse of what the homebrew community is really capable of, even without having webOS open source just yet. One of the better-known homebrew developers, he goes by Puff the Magic on Twitter, which is just a fantastic name. Also, his real name, Ryan Hope, is also fantastic. Posted a couple of pictures of an Evo 3D running webOS.
That's
more accurately, you could call it an Evo 3D booting webOS, because it was booting webOS 3.0 with the tablet version. with this translucent menu bar and comparatively small unlock icon, but on an Evo 3D, which is not webOS hardware. But actually, it kind of is. Actually, as it would turn out, the Evo 3D and the touchpad have very, very similar internals, down to the same processor and the same graphics chip. So actually hacking it onto there and making it boot and be able to do things like get into the app launcher was not a huge undertaking, but it was still a very interesting project. And this was all without even having the open source code available. This was taking the publicly available restore my touchpad to factory state webOS Doctor and using that to hack it onto different hardware. And this kind of makes you wonder, this guy's, he's very talented, as are all the people working in the webOS community and the homebrew groups and webOS internals. They're very talented, and they're doing all of this with sort of the implicit blessing of Palm and then HP, saying, you're doing good things to help sustain the enthusiast community. We're going to let you keep doing that. We might give you some assistance here or there. Here's a nice fancy new server because we appreciate what you're doing. But we can't really endorse it.
It's like the MacGyver approach at this point, right? They've got a paper clip and some gum, and they're doing spectacular things.
Exactly. And now they're going to have the actual code, the source code, to be able to go in and do amazing things. But it's still going to be somewhat for the niche community. If webOS internals and Ryan Hope and all of these fantastic homebrew developers are the only guys working on webOS, it's going to be fantastic webOS. But the question is then going to be who's going to use it.
Yeah. And will it be attractive to developers to keep making apps for it?
Exactly. And if it's something that you have, the only option you have is to hack it onto hardware, nobody's going to make apps for it. And that's what I'm afraid of. And I'm going sad and negative again.
Sad panda.
On a still sad note, we finally got an update to Pivot in the app catalog. Pivot, if you'll recall, was the app catalog magazine, which was a very unique way of going about helping users discover apps. The idea was that the app catalog for the touchpad was going to be just filled with applications that you would have trouble finding anything really unique and useful. So Pivot, this magazine, was going to give you some glimpses into the digital lifestyle and everything, and also give you recommendations for apps. There was going to be a monthly issue, and it would be just on the touchpad, and it would be only accessible through the app catalog. You'd fire up the app catalog, boom, there's Pivot, and you'd browse through and see this month's issue.
It was a great idea.
Oh yeah, it was a fantastic idea. It actually got nominated for a Digital Magazine Award. It was one of the 5 finalists for the technology and gadgets category. New this year. It's up against things like Wired and Gadgets Distro. Pivot is no more. Yeah. Unsurprisingly, the October issue was delayed a month into November, and we got a good ways into December with the November issue still there before it disappeared and was just replaced by generic featured apps, which it looks like is going to be the future of what used to be Pivot, which makes me sad.
I'm going to change the name officially to Generic Featured App Monthly.
Yeah, and the screen just says Featured Apps. I don't know if it's going to be monthly and how often they're going to update this. But essentially, it boils down what Pivot was intended for, to highlight apps in the app catalog and puts it into a small 4-page format instead of 30 or 40 pages.
It's the pamphlet version, the crib note version.
Yes, this is the Reader's Digest of Pivot.
It's the excerpt of the digest of the Pivot.
Yeah. So that is what's going on with Pivot. And the app catalog, somewhat hazy.
It could be worse, Derek. They could have launched Google Currents for webOS. I mean, it's not all bad.
Ooh. You're mean. But we we at webOS Nation still want to celebrate webOS.
Yeah.
Not just for our own selfish reasons that celebrating webOS gives us something to write about and hopefully sustains the operating system into the future so we continue to have our site around, but also because, we think webOS is great. We wouldn't be... I don't cheerlead for things I don't believe in.
That's the galling thing, right? It's like you look at webOS, you look how elegant it is, how innovative it is, and then you look at some of the operating systems that didn't have the opportunity, or the operating systems that are around still, and you're like, why this one and not that?
Right. So we still want to celebrate webOS because no matter its future, it's still awesome. So we're having our second annual Best of 2011 awards. These are the webOS Nation Best of 2011 awards. And just like last year, they're open to all apps, homebrew and app catalog, and developers and all that stuff. Plus, we're expanding it a little bit to break down between the best tablet apps and the best smartphone apps of the past year. So we have nominations are open right now. We're going to take your nominations and then sift through them and figure out what the top nominations are and pick through those and put it all up to a vote. I think we're planning on to do that next week, maybe at the end of this week, sometime soonish. We'll be putting it all up to a vote for you, the webOS Nation, to pick the best webOS apps, which will be fantastic because there's some good stuff out there. We've already gotten plenty of nominations in, but we'll take plenty more. There'll be a link in the show notes so you can check it all out. Put in your nominations because the developers and the community are why webOS has been able to sustain and exist to this point.
They deserve the attention and the recognition.
Exactly. They deserve the recognition for what they have done for the platform, and for the work that they've done. There are a lot of fantastic apps that can only exist on webOS as they exist due to things like Enyo and due to things like its web framework and the kind of developers that attracts.
And the kind of apps they allow.
Exactly. Pretty much, there have been a couple of apps that have been denied here or there, but by and large, they're unlike, they've taken the middle road between Apple and Google. The iPhone App Store, everything is very strictly screened, and if it doesn't meet Apple's purity standards, it's denied.
Yep.
Whereas Google, it's screened by a computer to make sure it hopefully doesn't screw up your phone, and is then released into the wilds, which is a
They didn't even block the pre-central bobbleheads. I mean, if there's ever an app to block.
Yeah. Whereas webOS, the app catalog, it's all still screened by humans. But they only screen it to make sure it's functional and not, massively objectionable. And it's released. There's no, we don't like this app type stuff. You aren't going to see something like Wi-Fi sync canned because HP plans to enable that feature later.
It duplicates future functionality.
No. They don't do that. And so these developers that have been able to come up with all this stuff, we want to celebrate them and give them the recognition that they deserve. So head over to the webOS Nation Best of 2011 Awards nominations and put in your choices. And then we'll get to doing some voting.
Awesome.
Yes, it will be quite awesome.
Are you going to let them pick a webOS device of the year? Because I think you actually had more than Apple put out last year or this year.
Officially, in the past year, we've had the touchpad and the Veer.
Well, I'm counting the pre-3 because you have one. Anything Derek has must be some way existent.
It was never really released, though.
Nothing unreal exists, Derek.
Good point. So, that's really the news. So, my app for the day, for the week, for the PalmCast of today is actually a homebrew app. It is called Agenda Z. It's sort of a combination of the Agenda homebrew app that would load into the catalog, or load into the calendar and pull out your appointments, and the Agenda view from Exhibition that is not available actually in the calendar. In calendar you have just the day, week, month view, and that's it. There is no agenda view, but you can get agenda and Exhibition from when your phone is just sitting there, which is somewhat frustrating. So this new homebrew app, available via the homebrew gallery on PreCentral and via Preware, is actually very handy. Here it is right here. It is a list of your appointments and the calendar events, but it's styled somewhat like the like the Exhibition agenda view, but it's had some enhancements to it. You can select your background right now. It's a homebrew app, so still somewhat in the, I guess you could call, beta stages. You can select your background to be the default blurry flowers, or I have it just a plain black, or you can even use your default wallpaper as the background for this app as well. You can now select calendars that will or will not appear. So if you happen to have, say in my case, I have some calendars that I share with my coworkers that give my availability, but they don't necessarily have exactly what's going on. I don't need to see that because I know what's happening in my life. I have the calendars with individual events on them to tell me what is happening. And I can have those. I can turn off calendars. I can have specific calendars turned on. It gives me more than just today. Right now it's showing what I have going on tomorrow, and I can scroll down and see what's going on 2 weeks from now, which apparently is Christmas.
It looks slick, Derek.
Yes, it's very slick. It's got color coding. You can tap on any one of these events and go to that calendar entry, and you get the exact same thing in Exhibition view, which is, it's finally given me, on my touchpad I use Flixie, which gives me a running Twitter stream, my weather, and a clock on my touchpad while it's sitting on the touchpad or touchstone charger. On my phone, I've gone back and forth with a handful of things, but I've always gone back to the clock, because everything else, it just was either too distracting or just didn't really seem like be worth my time or anything. I like to use the agenda, or I would have wanted to use the agenda view that's built in, but the lack of customizations and the fact that I couldn't view anything other than the day's events made it almost worthless to me. And Agenda Z solves that. It gives me exactly what I want when I want it, which is all the time. And I'm very, very happy to see that existing now, which I like to be happy.
Happy
Contrary to my popular image as a curmudgeon, I do enjoy being happy.
Cranky Derek is a bit more interesting on podcasts, but I think Happy Derek is better for the soul.
Happy Derek likes to be Happy Derek. Yes. So that is my app. I don't think Rene has any apps because he doesn't have a touchpad or a Pre.
I have a Pre 2, but it's a Verizon Pre 2, so I only get to use it when I'm in the US because we don't have CDMA networks here anymore, really.
Oh, poor thing.
Yeah. It's here and here.
And, well, we would really like to touch on Twitter, but it seems that Twitter's search for all of you that included the PalmCast hashtag with your tweets, Twitter is sort of failing us right now. I'm seeing about 5. So I don't really want to seem like I'm playing favorites for anybody. So as much as I'd like to do lightning round tonight, and it'd be just me doing the lightning round, probably going to skip that for tonight, and we'll grab you all next week. So thanks everybody for tuning in to the PalmCast. episode 152. Our first PalmCast under the webOS Nation banner.
Woo!
Woo! Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
You can follow webOS Nation at webOS Nation on Twitter. You can email them at podcast@webosnation, or you can leave a comment when the show goes live on the blog. They love hearing everything that you have to say. The webOS community is undeniably the strongest in the internet, and we really appreciate all your support. PalmCast Live is sponsored by the webOS accessory store, from cases to chargers and everything in between. The webOS store is your one-stop shop for all your Palm needs. And yes, we're calling it Palm. You can catch Derek on Twitter at DKDSNG, DK Design, without the vowels. You can catch me at Rene Ritchie. You can catch our entire network at Mobile Nations, and you can go to mobilenations.com/shows to see all our different podcasts, including Android Central, Crackberry, iPhone Live, iPad Live, Iterate, Zen and Tech, and just a plethora of other shows, a lot of them in video now. If you haven't already, please go to iTunes. Please subscribe to the PalmCast. It tells iTunes that you like the show, and it encourages them to feature it so that we can get more people from the community involved. And that's exactly why we are here. We will see you next time, folks. And we're going to be doing a special end of the year Mobile Nations podcast on Monday, where it will be Derek versus the world. So please tune in for that. Have a great night.